Throughout the development of any game, concept artists put forth a variety of visual representations of what they think the game's world, environment, characters, and items should look like. They may try to evoke a certain feeling, or try to experiment with different styles in order to better represent what they have been asked to design. Today, we're going to take a look at some of the concept art available for Fallout 76. I'm not an artist, so I don't know all of the fancy terminology that you would use to describe each piece of art, but here we go anyway. First up, we have some of the art for the door of Vault 76. This is interesting because the perspective of the vault relative to the rest of the world is very different in the final game. Normally, you wouldn't be able to see those diggers in the ash heap like you can in this concept. Also, the forest around the vault seems to be more dead and kind of blown out, unlike the vibrant forest we have in the live game. Here we have some art of the inside of the Atlas Observatory before it had been occupied by the Brotherhood of Steel. This here seems to be a pretty faithful representation of what we had in-game at the time. Here we have concepts from two of the shelters. One seems to be the Atrium, and the other seems to be a version of the living quarters. It looks like they used the Vault Boy cutout in order to represent scale in these renderings. Here we have a concept for Charleston, with some pretty significant differences to the final game. It seems to have a wider scope, and with more of these kind of wild, rounded skyscrapers. Also, there seems to be a building with Fusion written on it. Perhaps it was going to be a new company. It reminds me of the Mass Fusion building in Fallout 4. We can also see the Capitol in the background, with its gold rotunda dome. And down low we can see some dudes chillin', one with a backpack and the other with a stick, it would seem. Clearly some endgame players. Here we have a view of one of the streets in Charleston, with some ghouls and a large red rocket sign, with Mount Blair poking out in the far distance. Here we have a wide view of the environment, with two dome-like structures, a train or monorail, a town, and some very round-looking buildings. This image paints a vast and almost otherworldly vibe, like an expedition to another planet almost. It feels like the advanced technology and optimism of the new age is creeping into the old wilderness. I can't help but identify with the Vault Dweller sitting on the rocks, taking it all in. It really is something. This seems to be somewhere on the edge of the cranberry bog. We can see the huge mutated pink plants in the distance, with a heavy mist or fog rolling in. I find the two individuals walking casually to be funny, considering in the live game this region would be quite active with threats, from scorched beasts in the air to all manner of creatures ready to snack on them on the ground level. This seems to be a concept for an ash storm, very dark, very bleak. But strangely enough, this actually gives me Toxic Valley vibes, with all of these dead trees. It would have been very interesting for the ash storms to emanate from the ash heap and actually travel into the other biomes, kind of like how rad storms work in Fallout 4 coming from the glowing sea. It would have been even more amazing if these storms could have had a proper effect on the environment, changing how creatures behave and perhaps becoming a hazard to people caught in these storms. This is a concept for part of the forest, although this image doesn't convey the type of color we find in the live game. It almost feels like what parts of the bog sometimes feel like, with all that mist. Here we can see a hunter lining up a shot to take down a radstag. Hopefully he made a shot. Here is a concept for the Camden Park sign, with a full representation of Mr. Fuzzy. It looks like the sign was supposed to have Mr. Fuzzy's head wobble, and down low we can see a drawing of a kid with a balloon for scale. Now, I feel robbed. Why is there no balloon weapon in this game? This is very interesting. This is a concept for that crashed plane we have in the mire in the live game. In and of itself, this is represented pretty well. But what's of note is the red star on the plane and the undetonated bomb embedded into the floor of the swamp. This would seem to be a red Chinese star. If they had left this as a Chinese plane, this would have had some very interesting implications. First, that nuke could be set off or recovered by a faction, and second, there would be a possibility of a topside group of Chinese remnants, either as ghouls or as some sort of settlement. Here is someone overlooking the Harper's Ferry area from the cliffs above the Bish Company pipeline. You can see both bridges down there. Somehow, the town looks much more enclosed and smaller than what we ended up with. Also, the environment has a strange greenish glow to it. Perhaps this concept was before the mire was conceptualized, and maybe the region was to be affected by ultrasight somehow, much like we see with the fissure sites. Or maybe it's just the sun setting and I'm being over-imaginative. Here is an incredibly interesting shot to me. It's of the Somersville Dam, but in this concept, it's got a feeling about it that makes it feel so vast. The lake bed beneath and the bleached stone cliff face really gives this desolate feel, if not maybe a bit too bright. The dam lacks the improvised raider catwalks and other evidence of occupation. These super high cliff walls and its overall dry nature really reminds me of the water hazard level from Half-Life 2. Here is some art and graphics for the Wavy Willard water park, with a hippo, a rat, a frog, and the safari guy and alligator that would eventually become the park's mascot in the end. Here's some art of the actual park itself. The perspective makes the water slide seem so menacing and imposing, and the saturated colors of the art is kind of interesting. In the live game, things are usually more washed out. Here is a concept for the Brotherhood of Steel Armor and Under Armour. All in all, this seems like pretty much what we got in the end, although the armor seems more menacing in this art. In the live game, it's a little bit more goofy, if I'm honest. Here are some of the Raider outfits that were shown off ahead of the Wastelanders update. It looks like there may have been some additional improvised melee weapons also made up as part of this concept. We see an interesting hockey stick with a skate blade, a pipe, and a really cool halberd looking thing that looks like it was part of a wrought iron fence at some point. Here is some art for the Secret Service Power Armor, also known as the T-65. It's pretty close to the final product, but this art shows the Secret Service marking, a US flag, and some other markings. Something, now that I'm seeing it, I really wish had made it into the final game, as it would have made this armor more interesting and really helped cement this armor as being related to the Secret Service, something the game doesn't convey very well in my opinion. This art is crazy. It shows tons of iterations and derivative options of the Secret Service power armor concept, some with different pauldrons and knees, with different helmets and chests and arms, but most interesting are the modifications that seem to be a bigger departure from the standard power armor. The shield, the security standard, the lights, the arm-mounted blade, and this gigantic cannon. Maybe that was an early pepper shaker? Or maybe a completely different weapon. It looks like it shoots a 40mm based ammo, perhaps a grenade machine gun of some sort, or an autocannon. Nonetheless, this is some of the most interesting art I've seen yet. This is interesting. This seems to be different passes at a Chinese power armor. On the bottom left, we can see the closest thing to what we got in the end. But these other versions seem to be quite different, with some evoking a more kind of officer or commissar look, and some of them being more robotic, looking like a Liberator bot. We can see references to the propaganda robot poster and a Liberator bot as well. Here is the outfit, backpack, and wand for the Katie Inkwell character. It's pretty much as it is in-game, and I think this was a really good outfit, fitting in with that sort of comic aesthetic while also being pragmatic enough for wasteland use. Here are some variants of the Enclave officer uniform, one with a long coat, and one that has buttons more like the Fallout 3 uniform. I really like the longer coat. Here are some more variants, this time with a much more tan emphasis. We can see a redhead dual-wielding some pistols, which would have been an interesting mechanic that a lot of people would like to see in-game. Here is the forest camo version of the Enclave scout armor. It's pretty close to how it looks in-game. And here are lots of variants and concepts for the scout armor, with different color patterns and armor structures. Some of them look pretty cool, and some of them look a bit goofy. Here are some Under Armour concepts, with the one on the left looking like it would be right at home in Starfield. Looks like the one the blonde woman is wearing is the closest to what we got in the live game. Here are different variants and passes of the wood armor and masks. It's a little frustrating that we still don't have the wood mask in-game, but it's interesting to see the development process with this armor. Some versions feel more Cult of the Mothman-like, and some feel much more like you're strapping a piece of shrubbery to your chest with the hopes that it will stop a .308 round. Here are some concepts for the Sheepsquatch outfits, all having a different and menacing feel to them. With blood dripping, with bones and horns, they almost have a tribal feel to them. Here is a rendering of the Black Rider power armor skin. It's not my cup of joe, but I think it's pretty cool. Another one of those Apocalypse power armor skins, the War Rider. This one had a very Raider vibe. It's not my thing, but I thought it looked pretty cool when it dropped. Here we can see the Vault Suit art. This is something that Bethesda always spends a lot of time developing, seeing as everyone who ever plays the game will interact with it. We can see some pretty wild looking departures, with much more yellow. and if I'm honest, I'm glad we got the one we did instead of some of these versions this artist drew up. Still, it's interesting to see the thought process play out for this iconic outfit. Much like the Raiders, the Settlers have their own set of outfit concepts, most of which being standard work-type outfits, many of which have made it into the game pretty much as is. Seen here tacked on the studio wall, we can see a version of the Tick, both small and swollen by the blood it stole, as well as a side profile of the Honey Beast. Here we can see the different versions of floaters that were drawn up, with each elemental type having a different shape. I would imagine that budget and time constraints played a major factor in there only being one floater in the end. Here is a representation of the Wendigo Colossus, with its skin and fat drooping down. We can see one head has its own arm just hanging down, chillin', and the other one with its innards spilling out. Very ugly. Here is an untextured Scorch Beast and Snallygaster. Somehow, the Snally is even uglier without a texture on it. Here are some different outfits for the Scorched. We have seen them all dressed up in the past, as it seems like this is Bethesda's go-to for a quick and dirty event, so maybe we will see more of these outfits introduced in the future. Now that's a real radiation hazard if I've ever seen one. It seems like these versions used the earlier blue ultracite concept before it made the transition over to the green ultracite crystals we have now. Here we have some concepts for the Scorched Beast, with an ashen and flaming appearance. I think the artist had the Elder Scrolls dragons very much in mind. This one looks almost reptilian, with the way that it's bipedal. It would have been quite the sight to see this giant monster tower over us as we band together to try and bring it down. Here we have some different versions of the Scorch Beast heads, some more mammalian, some more insectoid, and one with a set of strange green pustules or holes, perhaps ultracite. Here we see one that's taken flight, with a very stylish hairdo. I think it's a bit too edgy, if I'm honest. Here we see all of the art and iterations of the Sheepsquatch, with all different types of fur and horns, some with ticks attached to it, some with spikes and pustules, some with cancerous corruption overtaking its body, others with almost insect-like eyes. It's truly fascinating to see the work that went into this creature. This concept for the Cargobot is funny. It seems to feature propellers instead of the rocket boosters that would eventually be on the final version. Here we have the Brotherhood surface-to-air missile turret, although this art seems to have more soot or residue from the missiles firing on the turret's chassis, something that I think would have been a nice touch. Here is the art for the Crusader Pistol, showing all of the different mods and attachments. This is pretty much what we got in the end. It's an awesome design. I just wish it wasn't such a grind to get our hands on it. Here is the concept for that cave exploration outfit thing and the bow that came along with the bundle. Lots of notes and details on the bow. I know not everyone likes the Atom Shop, but it's interesting to see all the work that must go into each item. Like the Crusader Pistol, the art for the Plasma Cutter shows the different attachments, although in the end we actually got more varied blade shapes than what was shown here. Here's the Hellstorm Launcher. Terrible weapon, very cool art. This looks almost cel-shaded, like it was ported straight from Borderlands. Very cool nonetheless. I don't know what this is, but I want it. It seems to have a giant barrel and muzzle brake, implying it takes a very large cartridge or shell, maybe 40mm. Some renderings of the Stanley skin, basically a trophy jammed onto a hockey stick. Who here remembers when Bethesda broke the animations for this thing for like weeks or months, making it really awkward to use in third person? I do. This is the prototype flying car, and I want one. We can find one in-game, and I wish there was more lore and backstory to this thing, because it seems like a flying car would have been a significant development for pre-war American consumers. Not that many people would be able to afford it with the crazy inflation. Here's some art of the jet ski we can find along the Ohio River in-game. Now if only we were able to take one of these for a spin. Here's the art for the Grelock Throne and the Grelock outfit, with lots of material and texture references. And here is one for the Grelock Throne. Although I'm disappointed we didn't get to eat any donuts in-game, I'm glad we got to see the art for this Slocum's Joe vendor robot. Speaking of vendors, here is the art for the Raider and Free States camp vendors. I remember people were pretty excited when these things came out, back when trading and vending was newer and people were more engaged with it. The art for the Brewing Station is pretty close to what we got in-game. I loved the update that this came with, a short quest, a new mechanic, and some reoccurring content afterwards. Wild Appalachia was a great set of updates that did a lot to improve the game. This art helps to convey the sheer scale and size of the Mount Blair Rockhound. Now if only we got to see it move in-game. Could you imagine a rolling workshop that would move through the region? That would be pretty cool. Tough to develop, but cool nonetheless. Here are some renderings and implementations of the Ash Forges. These were part of a cut quest called Old Flames, which had the player learn how to use one of these air purifiers and eventually unlock them as a camp item. Here's the Overseer's box and another stash box. That's pretty much what they look like. They are, in fact, very boxy. S'mores. Here is the concept and rendering of the Tinkerer's Bench, a great addition to the game. Now we don't have to craft everything from the chemistry bench like we did with every mod from Fallout 4. Here is a 3D representation of the camp module, indicating all of the different animations it would have, as well as a few other colored versions. This is the art for the legendary script exchange machine, cobbled together by the mole miners in service of Mama Mumbles. Not quite sure how it works or why it backfires every time we use it, but it's there, and it has no problem eating your gear. Here is the resource extractor for workshops and camps. It's pretty much what it looks like in-game, although we have a few more colors to help us distinguish what resource they were for. Here are the radio interceptors. These would end up being used for the decryption daily ops missions. Here is a rendering for the perk loadout board. It seems to be wall-mounted in this art, as opposed to the freestanding one we got in the live game. I did a whole video on this. This was the concept for a much more involved mutation system that would have the player actually change forms and pick different skill trees. It's very interesting. But I'm not sure about becoming a giant rat bastard though. Not for me. Here is a piece of art that a lot of players are familiar with. This shows tons of different backpacks, a lot of which have actually come to fruition. I'm still hoping to see some of the more down-to-earth and pragmatic versions, especially the Enclave and military ones. Here is some art for the Secret Service armor that seems to show that a light and medium variant was planned, as well as the standard heavy armor, which also bore the agency markings that the power armor concept had as well. Personally, I really like the different helmet and slimmer profile of the medium armor. Lastly, we have 3 really cool lithographs. This one's got a pair of guys in power armor with a pet Liberator bot, standing vigil while an ICBM launches from its silo, no doubt on its way to start an event of some sort. Looks like our friends headed out to the mire, to the crashed airplane, but they weren't very perceptive and are about to get jumped by a Wendigo. Our friend in T-51 returns, standing outside of the Mothman Museum, although this art makes the sign for the Mothman Museum seem a little bit too alive. I hope you enjoyed this look into some of the concept art for Fallout 76. Even if it isn't your favorite game in the series, hopefully you can appreciate the work and passion that goes into the things Bethesda designs and puts into the game. I love seeing this iterative development play out, and to think about the insights it gives into game development and world building. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. And if you want to see more concept art from the Fallout games, let me know.